So, Dr. Judi Earl, affectionately known as Judi, I've just learned, pasture ecologist and holistic grazing trainer. Judi gained a PhD in pasture ecology when she conducted the first studies describing the benefits to pasture composition from planned grazing. Judi has an extensive experience in how grasslands and pastures respond to grazing and fertility management, and is widely respected speaker on these matters, and I'm really looking forward to hearing your presentation. Establishing the AIMS consultancy in 1998, and a holistic management educator, or is a holistic management educator since 2002. Judi's main area of interest is working with land managers to enhance the condition and productivity of the land through improved understanding of ecosystem function, getting tongue-tied, the more effective utilisation of available resources. Judi showcases the capacity of grazing animals to regenerate her 454 hectare property in Glen Orton in New South Wales. So please welcome Judi to the stand.
David, and it is a pleasure to be here. I've got my cheat sheets so I can stick to time. I've got a tendency to ramble. So, grazing for landscape restoration. So in any discussion about landscape regeneration, restoration, there are hundreds of views and opinions on what it might be. But the majority really refer to elements such as improving soil health, increasing soil carbon, and increasing biodiversity. And that's been a recurring theme over the past day and a half at least. So I guess my main, or the starting point is that soil health starts with photosynthesis. Around half of the products of photosynthesis go into the soil via the root systems of plants, obviously. And these photosynthetates provide a primary food source for the soil biota, which are going to drive the nutrient cycling and enhance plant growth. But they also contribute to building soil health. So it follows that the more photosynthesis that's going on year-round, biodiversity of actively growing plants with healthy, robust root systems, the healthier the soil is going to be and the more productive the landscape will be. And again, that's come up a few times over the past couple of days. So given that grazing industries are based on plant growth, which is a function of photosynthetic rate and capacity, that's all going to be influenced by pasture species diversity, a different range of plants from different families with different life cycles, different root architecture, producing different phytochemicals, and generally different growth features. So maximising photosynthesis really is the basis of soil health, landscape restoration, but also as graziers, it drives animal production. And in terms of maximising growth and production, really we're looking at the combination of plant density, so how many plants per unit area are growing actively, and then increasing plant diversity. So the process of grazing involves an enormously complex range of interactions between plants, soils and animals, and that each of these has a significant influence on pasture growth, which ultimately determines your long-term sustainable stocking rate, which is a primary driver of profitability in any grazing enterprise. So some of the factors that influence and are involved in that growth are listed here, and these are just a few and broadly grouped under the headings of environmental, plant and soil factors. So while most of the environmental factors are out of our control, specifically rainfall and temperature, they can be influenced, and there are many more. Most of the plant and soil factors can be controlled or at least influenced strongly by our management. So it's important to consider that within a single property, the influences of these various factors can change significantly. And different aspects, different elements are going to be limiting within a property or even within a single paddock. And as a result, you'll have areas of varying production and productive potential. And as Christy put up a nice slide showing the variation within her property during the last session. So effectively managing that plant-soil-animal interaction by controlling the movement of livestock has got a significant influence on the many factors that influence plant growth. And so how animals move across the landscape has got a huge influence on land health. But I guess I would point out that I believe the concept of land regeneration and grazing livestock are entirely compatible, and one of the mantras that I've thrown out for many years is that as graziers, grazing livestock are actually the most important tools that we've got available to restore and regenerate our land, and most particularly grasslands. So although the processes involved are extremely complex and the factors that influence plant growth are many, there are just really a few key actions that we can take to inform our grazing decisions and ensure that we're moving towards landscape restoration. And these are the 4 that I'll be focusing on today in the limited time that we've got. So I guess the AIMS approach to grazing management and planning takes into consideration that the relative productive potential of different areas of your property and individual paddocks is certainly going to change year to year, season to season, month to month, and potentially week to week. And that measuring herbage mass is a key indicator of production. And it's also the easiest method available to you to gauge how effective photosynthesis is working on your property across the land and different areas of your property. So it allows you to make informed decisions, measuring herbage mass, around appropriate stocking, and enables you to plan utilisation, which is where the residual herbage mass comes in. So it really provides the key information that you need to conduct a feed budget and to set those animal and pasture production targets. So then that you can create a grazing plan to most effectively manage utilisation by controlling the movement of livestock across your land. So it allows you to take a very proactive approach to grazing management to ensure that as far as possible the decisions that you're making are in the best interests to enhance your landscape and also meet the nutritional demands of your stock over the course of each season and throughout the year. So although it's a pretty basic and essential activity, and you might notice that the name of our business is Agricultural Information and Monitoring Services, so since 1998 we've been encouraging people to monitor and measure their pastures, but it does seem to be a bit of a major challenge, a major blockage for a lot of graziers to actually get out and measure their pastures. So when I was working with Lewis Kahn, we developed the pasture management checklist for graziers in the northern tablelands of New South Wales and the North Coast. And since then, over time, we've developed other iterations specific to local conditions. And I've just done one up for the southwest region of WA, and we gave it a bit of a trial run at the workshop on Tuesday. And hopefully with the help of the Lower Blackwood Landcare group, it'll soon be available for distribution in this region. But without going into detail on the 12 points, step 1 in the whole process is measuring herbage mass. So it's not a difficult process. It's a simple combination of measuring the height of the pasture and the density of the pasture. So how many plants are actively growing in an area of soil. So, and without going into detail, very quickly, for an average pasture in this region, and certainly we're on the northern tablelands, an average pasture density is about 300 kilograms of dry matter per hectare per centimetre height. So that's the height to the top of the bulk of the leaves. So if you've got a pasture that's roughly 10 centimetres high and its average density, then that's equivalent to 3,000 kilograms of dry matter per hectare. If it's 5 centimetres high, it's equivalent to 1,500 kilograms of dry matter per hectare, and so on. So 2,000 kilograms is between 6 and 7 centimetres. One of the most effective ways that I've used to get people to remember the grazing window, and I meant to get a stubby bottle last night at the bar, but I forgot, so substitute with water. But if you use the stubby bottle as a guide, the top of the stubby bottle when animals go into a paddock is equivalent to somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 kilograms of dry matter per hectare, and when that stubby bottle is at its worst, the height of the dead stubby is about 5 centimetres. So if you use that as a guide in terms of your grazing window, you won't be too far off, and it seems to be a memorable gauge. So if you can get a handle on measuring herbage mass, you can much more effectively manage the residual after any grazing event. And in my mind, the most important part of the equation in terms of landscape restoration is managing what you leave behind, what is not consumed by livestock, and how long animals are not in the paddock, so allowing that area to rest. So it sounds a bit counterintuitive, but what you leave behind after any grazing event has got a far greater influence on the productive potential of your enterprise than what is actually consumed by livestock. So the main message is the more you leave behind, the faster it grows. And so the benefits of maintaining residual herbage mass, and I'm pretty sure I saw this list in Gabe's presentation before, maybe there's a few missing, but you know, the general principles are there, and these benefits are achieved by managing what you leave behind so that you're not doing excessive damage to root systems of plants, and you're maintaining maximum cover. And again, in terms of a golden rule, aim for at least 2,000 kilograms of dry matter per hectare residual, and not less than 1,500 kilos. So around about 6 to 7 centimetres is ideal, and not less than 5 centimetres, and you'll minimise damage to root systems. So utilisation, so leaving the appropriate amount of residual is really critical to managing utilisation, which is defined as the proportion of the pasture that you grow that is consumed by livestock in a given time period. And again, over the years I've come to the conclusion that utilisation is really a key, it's critical to landscape restoration, and that is the annual rate of utilisation. So what you grow over a year, the proportion of what you grow over the year that is consumed, but more importantly left behind, is critical. So the fact that it's actually a retrospective measure makes it a bit tricky, but the basic principle is grow more, use more, and leave more. And it's another concept that I think people struggle with a bit, so I've attempted, it might be a lame analogy, but I've attempted to use a quick analogy in terms of a cash flow budget. So humans, as a rule, as their income increases, there's a tendency to spend more. So as your income increases, expenses tend to rise. But of course, whatever the level of income, you have to ensure that that income exceeds the rate of expenses for the business to stay viable, and ideally put aside some an appropriate amount of savings each year to build capital. So the greater the income, the greater the capacity to put savings aside and increase your savings. So similar to a cash flow budget, you have to match your stocking rate to ensure the amount of pasture that you harvest is sufficient to meet the needs of livestock, but also, and more importantly, leave enough residual behind to build capital and capacity in the landscape. And again, we heard Gabe mention this morning, and it's probably been mentioned as well, the real wealth is in the soil. So the more you grow, looking at the left-hand side of that diagram, the more you can sustainably use, and still ensure that enough residual is left to build capacity in the landscape and encourage subsequent pasture growth. So we're leaving at least 2,500 kilograms of dry matter behind cumulatively over the year to protect the soil and build capacity in the landscape. So by ensuring we're leaving sufficient residual at any time, we're ensuring minimal damage to root systems and maintaining maximum ground cover. And also feeding all the other critters that the health and function of the grasslands depends on. So the mantra is grow more, use more, leave more. And the key tool, because this is a retrospective measure, is to actually conduct a feed budget. So actually plan to achieve optimal utilisation. And the first step in the feed budget is to be able to measure herbage mass and also to have some idea in terms of predicting pasture growth rate, which comes back to frequent measurement of herbage mass. So the feed budget is a process really to determine how many stock you can sustainably carry on an area, whether that be a property or a paddock, for a given period of time, so that you can ensure that the pasture matches animal requirements and also leave enough residual for all of those other critters that depend on the grassland. So it's exactly the same principle as a cash flow budget, if you like. So the key pieces of information that we need for a feed budget are the grazable area, the time period that you're planning for, how much feed you have at the start of the period, what amount of feed you want at the end of the period, what the animal requirements are, and there are fairly set DSE tables available to accurately determine animal requirements. You just need to know the weight and basic physiological requirements of your animals, as in your production targets, and then the feed budget calculates how many animals. Now, I didn't put this up to start with because it's a bit busy, but all of that printing and whatever comes down to those few factors on the left: the grazable area, the time, how much feed you've got, how much you want remaining at the end of the period, what your animals are going to be requiring during that period, and then how many animals you can carry is calculated for you by going through that process. So to my mind, in this environment, the most critical time for feed budgeting is in advance of the summer, the non-growing period. So, and again, ideally, if you plan to leave 2,000 kilograms of dry matter per hectare residual at the end of March, that'll protect the soil and stimulate pasture growth rate when the favourable conditions return in autumn. So, really how much you plan to leave is up to you, but if you aim for 2,000, you've always got a drought reserve up your sleeve. So the other critical thing, I believe that once herbage mass falls below 1,500 kilos, so as soon as you've got less than 5 centimetres of cover, your land is degrading. So the feed budget allows you to make an informed decision based on what you know and measure in your own paddocks. So it allows you to plan your feed months in advance, and particularly during the summer, you go in with confidence that you always have enough feed up your sleeve, and ideally you can eliminate or at least minimise the substitution feeding that is fairly common in this area at least, or you can know how much you'll actually need to purchase or put away for storage for the period that you're planning for, based on these data. So it enables timely and considered decisions to be made, so you can adjust numbers or fill the silo early, whatever you choose to do, and not hit mid-January or February and be in crisis mode. So decisions made early are usually better decisions, and you'll achieve the best outcomes for the land, livestock, your finances, and probably most importantly, your own peace of mind and well-being. So once the feed budget is completed, the next and final step of the process is planning the grazing. And the grazing plan that we promote is an Excel spreadsheet to help with the calculations, but the key principles are pretty much on this slide. You want to minimise the number of mobs to manage that utilisation. You want to try and maximise the number of paddocks per mob to give greater control and flexibility. Most importantly, base the movements on herbage mass, based on those mantras of the more you grow, the more you leave, the faster it grows, and grow more, use more, leave more. And by the appropriate amount of residual is going to change throughout the year. But essentially, monitoring your pasture growth will allow you to make more informed decisions based on what you've got and what you can see across the landscape. And with appropriate grazing management, managing to control utilisation based on the amount that you grow, it's not unusual to double pasture growth and restore the landscape in the process. And in the words of Don Campbell, as described by Gabe this morning, you know, major changes are in the way that you see things. The first step is to look, and then I would suggest the second step is to monitor and then measure and record. So that is the general approach that we take to grazing management. So, if you're interested in the tools, the feed budgeting tools, the grazing planning software is all available for free download at that website. So.